Guys joining me today. Like I said, I'm Jordan Reid, senior NFL draft analyst for a company called the Draft Network. Been working there since last June, a job that I really appreciate. Just to give you guys a little bit of background about me. Um, Back in 2010, I started out playing quarterback at North Carolina Central University, small school in Durham, North Carolina. I'm sure all of you have heard of Duke University before. It's about 5 to 10 minutes outside of that. Played quarterback there, 3 years started there. Then after that, I went right into coaching. I was a graduate assistant for 2 years, and then I went on to coach the running backs and also the quarterbacks for a few years after that in a conference called the MEAC. Some of y'all might have heard that before. Some really good schools in it, North Carolina A&T, South Carolina State, and some other teams of that nature as well. Was there for full time for 3 years. We were unfortunately let go following the 2018 season, and then I transitioned right into this job I have now. And I've always wanted to figure out a way how to combine sports writing and then being able to stay in it a little bit. I had twin girls, so I know a lot of you guys are coaches on here, and you know how demanding coaching could be. So I had to get out of it a little bit just because of that situation. But a really fortunate job, having a lot of fun, man, traveling around the country, scouting all these kids and around the country. And, I'm really looking forward to talking to you guys a little bit about player evaluation. A lot of good stuff. First, it's only two parts to this conversation. Not really lengthy, but just some stuff I would really like to get into. The first thing that I always start with a prospect's evaluation is the character and the intangible part of it. And the big thing that, sitting down with some of these guys that I've talked to, even down at the combine, talking to Jalen Hurts and Chase Young and all of these guys, the first thing these teams want to know is, who are you with your helmet off? I can see that you're sacking the quarterback. I can see that you're throwing touchdowns, but they really don't care much about that. Of course, that's a big piece to the puzzle, but the big thing they want to see is, how are you going to represent our organization? Just because we're investing so much money in you, but who are you with your helmet off? So I think that's the big thing, the first step that you have to figure out when you're evaluating these kids. And even that goes for high school coaches as well. And I know a lot of you guys are big into some of the local middle schools around you. You have to evaluate who you're bringing into your program, just because high school and college is all about branding. And then being a recruiting coordinator for 3 years, of course, you take demands from the head coach. But the biggest thing every head coach wants you to know is that we want kids that represent our brand. So each of you has a brand at your school. I'm not sure exactly what it is. I'm sure it's different for every single person that's on here. But the first thing you have to evaluate is character, intangibles, and do these kids that you're bringing into your program match your brand? And this is why I think the New England Patriots have been so successful during their tenure over the past 20 years, is that everybody buys in and they bring in people that represent their brand. And if it does not represent their brand, they cut bait with them quickly. Antonio Brown was a great example of it. And no matter how great Tom Brady was, he's getting a bit long in the tooth. He's getting older, and he just doesn't represent the brand as well as what Bill Belichick wants up to the standard now. So whatever those standards are, you have to stick by it. And when I was at North Carolina Central, that's something that we were really adamant about. You have to understand exactly what your brand is, whatever that may be, and then you have to stick to it no matter what. So make sure you stick to your brand. And just understanding what your brand is. And then piggybacking off of that, you have to mold your scheme and personnel around it in your own unique way in order to fit that brand. And this really relates to high school and the college level, specifically high school, just because, of course, you guys can't pick and choose of who you bring into your program, just because you can't recruit and you can't bring in certain kids like you can in college. But you have to figure out exactly what fits your personnel and go from that. And what I mean by that is, whatever your system may be, whether that's spread, wing tee, whatever you're running, you have to figure out a way to tweak it around that and figure out exactly what your brand is and then go from there. So just molding your scheme and your personnel around your brand and really putting your own blueprint or your own identity into it, that's something that was really good for us and why we were able to win so many championships. When I was at North Carolina Central, we didn't have the best of the most talented kids, but the first thing that we were able to do is we were able to identify exactly what type of kids fit what we're trying to do. We're not going to bring in, if we have a quarterback that really struggles with accuracy, we're not going to bring in a kid that is mostly a body catcher, if that makes sense. We got to get guys that play above the rim, that have wide catch radius, that can go up and attack the ball, just because we have a quarterback that isn't great. as far as his accuracy. So we have to figure out the best way to help him. And then that goes with your offensive line as well. We're not going to have a quarterback that can sit back there and sling the ball all over the yard, but he's not mobile just because we don't have a good offensive line. We got to find a guy that can essentially become an extra runner, an extra running back in a sense, just because our offensive line isn't great. They can't hold up. So we have to figure out a way to find a guy that can play a little bit of a sandlot football in the sense he can go around, he can create and make everything better and make everybody better around him. So that just gives you a little bit of a snapshot of what I mean by that. And then the biggest thing that I tell everybody, whenever you're evaluating a player, you have to take all bias out of it and you have to treat everybody the same. This is so important, especially if you're trying to build a program, just because if you hold one person up to a different standard than another person, no matter if he's a star player or if he's the 50th man on your roster, you have to treat everybody the exact same, just because all of you guys know these kids they talk to each other. And if this person does the same thing, if this person does the same thing that another person does, and you don't hold them accountable or to the same consequences as the star player or that 50th man on the bench, you're going to lose the respect of the kids. So whenever you're evaluating these kids and whenever you're bringing them into your program, once you get them into your program, you have to make sure you hold them to the same exact standard, just because that's how you get the respect of the kids and that's how they play hard for you, just because they know they have the same expectations and they have the same standards no matter who they are, whether they're a 1,000-yard rusher or they're a walk-on kid. You have to hold each person accountable, just because you never know when you're going to need certain players. And I learned this my very first year as a graduate assistant. You never know when that person or that 50th man off the bench is going to make plays for you, just because my very first year when I was at Central, we were down to 6 offensive linemen. We were absolutely decimated amongst the offensive line, but we had a kid. I'll never forget his name. His name was Desmond Cooper. He was our 4th offensive tackle. Had never played a snap of football ever in his life. He was a walk-on kid. He came in and played the last 2 games of the year, and we ended up winning the conference championship. We never thought going into the year that we were going to need that kid, but that just goes to show you that you have to hold all of these kids to the same standard, just because you never know when you're going to need that walk-on kid or that 50th kid on your roster. So just make sure you're holding all these guys to the same standard and you keep your bias out of all of your evaluations with these guys. And then the second part I want to get to with this conversation is just the on-field impact that these kids can have. You always want to focus on what a player can do. Don't focus on what they cannot do. I think that's something that a lot of NFL executives and then even colleges, that's where they go wrong in some of these evaluations. You want to focus on what a guy can do, and then whatever they can't do, you want to figure out how you can improve upon that. And there's plenty of examples around the league of how these guys, they just are not good in certain areas, but they figure out ways to finagle their way around it. And a great example just happened here recently: the Buffalo Bills. I love what they're doing. Josh Allen coming into his career in the NFL, everybody knew that he wasn't the most accurate quarterback in the world. He barely got over 50% completion percentage when he was at Wyoming. So it wasn't a secret that accuracy was one of his biggest downfalls. Well, what they do is they go out, they get a very strong offensive line, and then they go out and get who I think is one of the best receivers and one of the best separators in the league, and Stephon Diggs. So just figure out a way you can help them overcome their deficiencies. I think that's something that you have to do with some of these kids that you have on your roster. So no matter who it is on your roster, figure out what they can do, just because a football team is just a big puzzle, man. And what I love about football and why I love and take so much pride in it is that most sports around the world, you have multiple games during the week. Football, you only get a chance to get it right once a week. That's why I love football, and everything has to come together for you to win that game. It's so hard to win football games, man. I really learned that in college, especially as a coach. You put so much work into it during the week. You're grinding, you're watching film, you're making sure all your kids are where they're supposed to be, study hall, weight room. And then, of course, you still have to go out there and execute the game plan as well. You only get one chance a week to get it right. And that's why I think football is so special from some of these other sports. But you always want to focus on what a player can't do what a player can do as opposed to what they can't do. And then whatever they can't do, you want to make sure you figure out a way to improve on some of those struggles. And then lastly, something else that I have in my notes is you always want to focus on what got you to where you are, and then what won't get you to where you need to be, though. And what I mean by that is never be satisfied no matter how much success you have. And we won 3 conference championships in a row. And the biggest thing that happens in football in general, in any level, is complacency. And you stay hungry for that first championship just because you get your first taste of it. And then once you get that first taste of it, I think some people dwindle after that point just because they get satisfied and that hunger kind of leaves a little bit. But what was so good about our staff, of course, is the chemistry, but it was just the hunger for more. And that's why I like some of these athletes like a Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, Michael Jordan. Once they got that first taste of a title, it's like, okay, I understand what it takes to do this. Now let's go do this again. And that's something that you have to instill in your program. And it starts at the top, whatever position that you hold. Whenever you're preparing and your preparation, you have to prepare yourself as if you're the head coach, just because you never know when your opportunity is going to come. Just because I was a graduate assistant, what happened in the span of a week is that our running backs coach, he got a head coaching job at what was called Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina. And our head coach said, I don't want to bring anybody else. We have a tight-knit family right now. So he bumped me up right away. But I already prepared myself for that moment. And what I did was I had presentations ready for every position. As a graduate assistant, I prepared myself for if I was a quarterbacks, running backs, tight ends, receivers, or even an offensive line coach, no matter what it was, just because I was ready for that moment. And I knew it was going to happen just because we were so talented. And you guys see it around the league and colleges. These coaches get poached off coaching staffs every year just because everybody wants to run their own program. And that's how you have to run your own room, whether you're a quarterback coach, running back coach, defensive coach, corners, it doesn't matter. Run your room as if you're the head coach. You have to prepare yourself that moment just because you're already getting practice, already getting that practice in. And I was over the quarterback's room for a little bit when I was a graduate assistant. And, we had one of the best quarterbacks in school history. His name is Malcolm Bell. And he was like my little project, but I didn't treat Malcolm any different from any others in that room just because Malcolm got hurt during the year. And then we had to go out there and we had to play one game with a walk-on. And he was fully prepared. And that's why I say you have to prepare these kids no matter what. And you have to treat every kid the same. And that's what I mean by holding them to the standard. You can't treat the star player different from anybody else. So that's pretty much my presentation for you guys. And, I'll open up the floor for any questions. I'm sure you guys might have some questions for me.
Yeah, I have one. Curious. So obviously you were talking about how, you want to know who these players are with their helmets off. Are there any like specific questions that, that like kind of like your go-to questions that you'll ask so you can really get a feel of their character?
Yeah, so the first thing that I do in any school that I visit, I ask anybody in the facility, from the strength coach to the janitor to teachers, if they're in the facilities, I ask them exactly who is this kid? Who is he? Just because I know that they're going to tell the truth. And I mean, you guys have been there before. We're going to kind of sugarcoat it a little bit just because we want the kid to feel good about himself. And we want him to have a good image out there. But these professors, these janitors, and everybody else, the strength coach, everybody in that building is going to have a good feel for exactly how his character is, and they're less likely to sugarcoat it as opposed to an actual football coach. So whenever I'm going in the building, like, for example, I went to Lenore Ryan this past season, Kyle Duggar, they have a kid that's probably going to end up being a second or a third round pick. I went right away, and I went to see him play live. I think it was against Carson Newman. And I was just asking everybody out there, just what type of kid is he? Just because, especially being a small school kid, you want to know, is his ego a little bit bigger just because, with those small school kids, they're high and mighty, they know they're the star player, and they kind of know their stuff doesn't stink. And I wanted to know, like, just what type of kid is he? And he had glowing reviews. And now you're seeing it now. He's invited to the Senior Bowl. He blew up at the combine. He ran 4.4. He jumped out the gym 40-plus vertical. So now he has great background checks. And now he's blowing it up at the combine. So now his status is through the roof right now. So little things like that, I just want to ask, like, what type of person is he? And, would you trust him at home if he was your son, or would you let him date your daughter? Little sneaky questions like that. Like that really helps if that answers your question.
Yeah,
Oh, excuse
absolutely.
me, if that answers your question.
No, absolutely. That's always interesting to understand like what exactly you're asking. But I've heard college coaches say that all the time. Like they'll come in and I mean they'll talk to other people outside of the
Yeah,
football coaches, whether it's the
yeah,
secretary, custodian, lunch
yeah.
lady, just to get a feel. Just to get a feel. So anybody have any questions in here? I'm sure they'll type in the chat. Now, who are some of, obviously outside of some of the big names and Duggar that you just spoke of, was there anybody that for you really like jumped out at you?
Um, Jalen Hurts definitely was one. He was, man, he's however you see him on TV, he's exactly like that in person. Always monotone, always laid back. And the thing I love about Jalen is that his poise is always intact. And just talking to him, I believe it was like 2 months ago, when the Baylor game happened, he was like, you really enjoy like him being under center for you just because his poise it's amazing, man. And like he never panics, he never is too high, he's never too low. And just however you see him on TV, that's exactly how he remains the entire time. And then it carries over into games. And I think the great thing about Jalen and what's a credit to his character is that he went from one high level program to another, from Alabama to Oklahoma, and he was named the team captain. So that just goes to show you how well his character is and how well welcomed he was in the locker room.
That's awesome. All right, we got a question from your boy. When you were coaching in college, what were some red flags during the recruiting process that forced you to stop recruiting a kid?
That's a really good question. I'm trying to think of an example. I think the weight room aspect, being scared of the weight room, was one thing that really kind of scared our head coach away, just because work ethic that really is accredited. We really accredit that to the weight room. If a kid, as a football player, if you don't want to go in the weight room and work, that really shows us how lack of a work ethic that you do have, especially being a football player. The weight room is very important. I don't know too many players that don't lift and then go on to have success. So just not being fully locked in the weight room, that definitely is something that has stopped us from recruiting a kid. And then I forget the school. It was somewhere in South Carolina, I believe it was. I actually talked to a lunch lady, and she was talking about how she has to clean up after this kid every single day. He's leaving his lunch tray on the table. Just little undisciplined stuff like that. How can I trust you to be this certain place on a route or this certain place in a coverage if you can't simply clean up your lunch tray? So little things like that, it all falls back to discipline.
For sure. Here's another one, Coach. When you were recruiting in college, when evaluating kids, did the opponents they were playing have any weight to that player's evaluation? That's a great question. I'd like to know that too.
So let me read the question again. When you were recruiting in college, when evaluating kids, did the opponents they were playing have any weights? Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I had to read the question again to understand it. Yeah, just because this is really hard to answer. And we know that you have different levels of football, 1A, 2A, 3A. Some states even go at the 5, 6, and 7A. And I think you really have to evaluate the person. You have to figure out a way to isolate that player away from his surroundings, if that makes sense. So let's take a cornerback, for example. You have to look, of course, at his speed. You have to have speed at the position. But how well does he transition in and out of his breaks? And I think something that really helps isolate everything is summer camps. And I reiterate these. I reiterated this to kids all around the country. You have to go to summer camps just because summer camps are so important. This is where coaches get a glimpse of you, and I tell them, don't just go to these big camps like NC State, Carolina, Duke. Don't be scared to go to these 1AA camps, these Division II camps, just because at these big camps, they already know who they want. We know these 24/7 recruiting services. These schools already know who they want, and they very rarely stumble upon a hidden gem like you. So these summer camps are really important just because you're just a number, if that makes sense, at some of these big camps. But at some of these smaller school camps, you're going to stick out more as opposed to being amongst 600 camps. And you go to a camp like a North Carolina Central, we only had like 150 kids a year at the camp. So it's much easier for you to stick out amongst 150 kids as opposed to 600 kids. And then at these bigger camps, if you're a receiver, if you're doing competition, you're only going to get to run like 1 or 2 routes. But at these smaller camps, you're going through an entire route tree. And, we have slots going, we have insides going, we have outside guys going as well. So you're going to get to compete a little bit more. And the biggest thing that you want to do is being able to get your ability to be shown in front of some of these coaches. So I think going to some of these smaller school camps, it helps you isolate that prospect from some of the competition. But it is really hard. And I think the best example of this, Coach Sean Gibbs from North Carolina A&T was telling me about this when they were recruiting Tariq Cohen. And I'm sure all of you guys have heard of that name before, the running back for the Chicago Bears. And they were really hesitant on Tariq. But what took them over the top is that, of course, his character was just outstandingly good. But all of the traits that they look for in a running back, and this goes back to the brand and your identity of what you want to be as a program, he really represented that. So you have to figure out a way to isolate these kids from the competition. And if they represent exactly what you want from that position, don't be scared to offer them. And then once you offer them, you get a look at them at that summer camp. So that's why it's so big for these prospects to go to these summer camps, just because that's really these coaches' first glimpse of being able to see that prospect in person. That's where that isolation begins.
For sure. Before we get to Coach Reid's question, in your opinion, for a high school athlete, and maybe it depends on what grade year they're in, but what would be your recommendation for the amount of camps, like how many they should go to during the summer?
As many as possible. As many as possible. You can never get too much exposure, whether that's a one-day camp or a week-long camp. I'm not really deep into the summer game or summer camp game now just because I've been out of it for a couple of years. But just as far as exposure, you can never have too much exposure. And what's happening now, I know schools from Florida used to do this when I was at Central. They would get a bus of about 20 or 30 kids and just drive them around to different states. So that just goes to show you team camps are great. These 7-on-7 camps are really good. These individual prospect camps are really good. So just go to as many camps as you can, just because these kids aren't doing anything during the summer anyway, man. They're just sitting at home playing PlayStation and eating up all the grocery in the house. So just get as much exposure as you can. That's what I would say.
You kind of touched on it a little bit before, but Coach Reeves wants to know, what do you think about like the mega camps? So like, obviously there's those camps that they may have 30, 40 schools broadcast and showcase there. So what's your opinion on them?
It's good, and I think it's awesome, and I love that these big schools are actually allowing some of these smaller schools to come in, just because they invite. And then what happens is, with these prospects that are at these bigger schools, some of their teammates, I don't want to call them leeches, but they're a bit tag-alongs. They're not getting the big exposure, of course, but most of their exposure is coming just because they have these bigger kids at their school. So what's happening is they're slipping through the cracks just because of Notre Dame or Clemson or Alabama. Those are the only schools coming in. But once you go to these satellite camps, I believe that's what they're still called, these satellite camps, where they have some of these 1AA and these Division II schools, now you're getting that ultimate exposure. So I think it's really good. I think mega camps are awesome.
Obviously, measurables are a big factor to a lot of coaches now, like everybody. I mean, we know there's no exact formula for recruiting. Everybody's going to kind of go a different route or whatever. But as far as measurables, sometimes, you may find a guy that maybe he's not, he's a couple inches shorter, or, maybe he's not the weight or whatever. But, I mean, he's a good football player. He's a good he's a dog, whatever. And some of these guys get overlooked. Like, what's your opinion on that? Do you feel like maybe sometimes, like, of course, like I said, the measurables do play a factor, but I mean, if the guy can play football and he's a good, he's a good character kid and his work ethic is there, do you feel like, some of these schools should really still take a shot, or, what's your opinion about that?
Yeah, I think it's a case-by-case basis, and there's just some positions where you have to have length, and I think cornerback is one position that's really trending that way, just because receivers are so big, man. They're so athletic now. You want to have some length at that position, but if you have guys that's a dog in a sense, I mean, I was completely fine with them. It just, once again, it goes back to, do they represent exactly what your brand really entails? And then with that, I think the biggest thing that a lot of schools really miss on with some of these kids is that they get so caught in the measurables. They want their corners to be 6'1", 6'2", that they miss out on these 5'9" and 5'10" guys that have much more ability, even though they don't have the length. And then something that we were really good with at Central was that we were able to mold kids in what we want them to be, if that makes sense. We weren't going to get the biggest, fastest, or the strongest kids, but we were going to take the kids that have the potential of what we eventually want them to represent, which was our brand. So just molding those kids and what you want them to be, I think that's something that these schools need to do more of. But you're going to have these schools that are really petty about having these baseline and, some of these things that they require, the corners being 6'1" or 6'2", but sometimes there's that diamond in the rough that's just as good at 5'9" or 5'10". It's just a matter of, it's a case-by-case basis with some of these schools.
No, for sure. For sure. Anybody in the chat have any questions right now? See if anyone pops one up. Just on a draft network standpoint, or
Yeah.
your drafting report that you're putting together. Now, how long? Obviously, you're saying 350 pages. I mean, it's obviously in depth. I've
Yeah.
seen personally, man, it's really great stuff. If you guys haven't checked it out, make sure you do. But how long does that take you to put together?
It's a 10-month project, and I do all my research in June and July. That's really when I do most of my research. That's when I gather all these background stuff and, doing background checks, calling some coaches that I know, just trying to figure out exactly who this kid is for the most part. And then after that, that's when I dive into the film. I'm blessed enough to, have a database of all 22 film, just getting some of the best games from around the country. And that's when I start to watch some of these kids I like to watch. 4 to 6 games on each kid that I'm watching. That really allows me to get a good feel for exactly who they are as a prospect. Of course, I want to see you against your best competition, but I also want to watch your worst game as well, just to see how you respond with adversity. So that's some of my baseline requirements with everything.
You obviously, I'm sure, look into, there's certain things that you specifically look for with each position. As they're in game. Could you give us a couple examples of like specific things that you look for based on a position?
Yeah, that's a good question. Quarterback, I'll just start with that. I really start with the quarterbacks. I think mentally, that's really where I like to start things for the most part, just because offenses are so different from around the country. Each team's offense is different. You have some teams that run full field reads, some teams cut half of the field off for some players, and then you have some teams that really play what I like to call side to side game, where they're just throwing quick screens and getting the ball as quick as they can. So I think with quarterback, it also starts from the ground up with me. I want to see how good their feet are, just because you have to be able to react so quickly in the game today. And it's not just high school, it's college and the NFL as well. And then the game now is becoming such an out of structure game, and you can call the perfect play, but we know everything doesn't go as scheduled as you draw it up on the whiteboard. So with these quarterbacks, you have to be mobile. For me, that really is a big part of what I require in quarterbacks nowadays, just because you don't really have these prototypical drop back passes that's throwing the ball 40, 50 times a game anymore. You have to be able to have these guys that can create what I like to call off script and out of structure. I think that's something that should be required for quarterbacks nowadays, just because it's an off script game. It's becoming more of a sandlot game. And I think that's something that is big with quarterbacks nowadays. Of course, the mental part of it. And I think the biggest thing with quarterbacks, the two biggest things that I look for is accuracy and decision making. And I think you have to know the difference between ball placement and accuracy. And with ball placement is where you're putting the ball and where defenders are located. Are you throwing it away from where defenders are located? And then with accuracy, are you throwing the ball on time? Are you taking a 3-step drop when you're supposed to take a 3-step drop? Are you taking a gather step when you're supposed to get it out quickly, whether that's a quick hitch or a quick slant on the outside? So how good is your accuracy in those situations? And then, of course, decision making. That's the top thing that I look for with quarterbacks. Are they going where they're supposed to go with the ball? Then the next position I'll go to is running back. Just coaching running backs, the first thing that I always look for, two things I should say, is footwork and vision. Just because vision is one thing I don't think you can coach as a running backs coach, just because I think it comes from mommy and daddy. Either you have it or you don't. It's a God-given trait. You can tell a kid where to look, but for them to react right away, that's just something that is God given to them. So vision is something that I look for. And then footwork is the next thing that I look for, just because running back is all reactionary. And you can block the play up perfectly. You can have a hole right away. But how well can you react, and how good can you hit the hole when it is there? If the hole is not there, can you create, in a sense, and get what I like to call the hidden yardage, or yardage that's not blocked up? So that's just a glimpse of some things that I look for in quarterbacks and running backs.
I'm gonna ask because I coach receivers. How about that position?
So receivers is kind of hard, just because there's so many different parts and there's so
Right.
many different types of receivers. You have your slot receivers, you have your outside receivers, and then and I think receivers are kind of like a basketball team. And what I mean by that is you have different types. You have your power forwards, your big body guys that like to go up and get the ball, whether that's your X receiver or your Z receiver. And then you have your point guards, your guys that play on the inside, your short, shifty guys that really can have the offense really centered around them, just because a lot of offenses now are really played in between the hashes, especially the high school game. We're not always high school coaches aren't always blessed with the best trigger man, I like to call it, the best quarterback back there. So you have to play the game in between the hashes a lot. So slot receivers are very important, just because they're getting a bulk of the reps, they're getting a bulk of the workload, just because that's where the most of the game is really played. But receivers, I think, of course, quick twitch is something that I look for. How quick are you at the line of scrimmage, just because you have to be able to beat press. And it's not as glorified in high school, but in college, if you cannot beat press, you're not going to be very successful, just because these corners, just because of how good and how well diverse and how wide open these offenses are in college, they're going to come down and challenge you, whether that's cover two or cover one man or press man. These offenses are going to try to slow down, or these defenses, I should say, they're going to try to slow down your timing, just because they're going to come down, they're going to try to challenge you. How well are you against press? I think that's something that is big with receivers. Of course, catching the ball, I think that's very important, just because you can't do anything without the ball at receiver. And then how unselfish are you? That's something that we used to look at on film at Central. Are you running down the field when a receiver has the ball, your counterpart? Are you trying to get what we like to call the touchdown block? And the touchdown block is there was no explosive plays or explosive running plays without receivers blocking down the field. And that's what we used to tell our receivers. We actually had a sign in our locker room. I forgot what it said, but with receivers, touchdown blocks are made through receivers, just because we had some receivers that they would just coast down the field and they would do what we like to call play watch. Play watch is looking at the running back and seeing what he is going to do. And we used to always say, if you want to watch the play, just go in the stands and buy a ticket. We can tell you to do that right away, but we want you to be nasty. We want you to compete, and we want you to end these guys' life on the perimeter and make sure that it's a long day for them on the perimeter. So that's something that we look for in receivers.
For sure. Coach Gant asked, what do you think of the Scout Academy?
It's good. Dan Hatman, the guy that's over it, is actually one of my really close friends. It's about something that he started, I think, about 8 or 9 years ago. It is pretty expensive. I think it's around $1,000, but it is a really, really good program from what I've heard. I've never been through it, but it teaches you just how to break down film and watch it, and you actually go over each position. You go over every position on offense. You go over every position on defense, and you look at all 22 from NFL games, the coach's film, and it gives you a step-by-step guide of what to look for in each position. So I think it's a really good program, and the best thing about that is you're also establishing contacts with that as well. And every person that's been through the Scouting Academy, they've eventually they've actually gotten contacts in the league, and then they've gotten jobs in the league as well. So it's a really good program from what I hear.
So kind of off topic, what do you take of all this the free agency right now?
It's crazy, man. There's so much going on. I'm looking at my phone trying to keep up with everything right now, but it's pretty cool, with no sports on right now. It's a really nice feeling to have.
For sure. What do you think's been the best move so far and the worst move so far, in your opinion?
Best move, I would say I like Diggs to the Bills. I think that was a really good fit for them. Getting Josh Allen some help. Worst move, I don't know what the Bears are doing at quarterback, man. I was hoping Cam Newton would go there, but I'm not a big fan of Trubisky. I wasn't a big fan of him coming out either. Them trading for Nick Foles, I just think it kind of was redundant. They're pretty much the same guy to me. I was hoping Cam could go there.
Yeah, I thought that, I just saw that before. I thought that was a strange move too.
Yeah.
Kind of wild. What do you think about the Brady deal? How do you think he'll do in Tampa?
Oh, I forgot about that. I'm a little bit skeptical about it. It gives me a little bit of pause. I think it was a better situation as far as personnel standpoint in Tampa Bay as opposed to New England. New England, they don't really have a lot of go-to guys for him. But, Tampa Bay, they're loaded at receiver. Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are really good players. They have O.J. Howard at tight end. We'll see what happens with the running back situation. They like Ronald Jones a lot down there. But why I say I got a little bit of pause about it, just because B.A. Bruce Arians, he wants to push the ball down the field. That's what B.A. he loves to do. He did it every single stop that he's had when he was in Pittsburgh with Big Ben, when he was in Indy with Andrew Luck, and then in Arizona with Carson Palmer. He wants to push the ball down the field. And we all know Brady, he's 43 years old, man. Yeah. He can't push the ball down the field like that anymore. He's more of an underneath type of guy. So B.A. is going to have to change his offense a little bit more. But I'm excited for my guy Byron Leftwich to work with Tom Brady. So I'm excited about that. I hope they play well.
For sure. Coach said Littleton to the Raiders was huge.
Yeah, it was. And Mayock's doing a good job, man. He's building a really good roster up there. And I like what he's doing up there. So we'll see. I'm not a big fan of the quarterback. I think they got to figure out that situation. Derek Carr. They signed Mariota as well, but we'll see what happens out of that.
Do you think how much do you think Mariota will push him for that starting spot?
I don't know, man. I think Mariota needed to change his scenery. I think he had to get out of Tennessee. It may be a situation where, what just happened. with Ryan Tannehill to the Titans. The change of scenery can really help a guy. So we'll see what happens. It's a 1-year deal. Maybe he'll push Carr. I think that'll help him out a lot, though.
Coach Lorena wants to know, what's your take on the Giants and Blake Martinez? 3 years, $30 million.
Thought they overpaid him, man. Martinez isn't very athletic. That's the thing about him. But they needed some help in the middle, man. Gettleman, he's a different cat, man. Gettleman's different. But I mean, he's building a good team up there. They got to figure out some things, especially on offense, what they want to do. They got to get Daniel Jones some help on the perimeter, but they believe in him. Martinez, they needed some linebackers bad up there, man, just because Ogletree, he wasn't the answer up there. I was hoping they would take the kid from Clemson, Isaiah Simmons. I still think they possibly can. So I think he'll help them out a lot.
I was going to say, do you think they do that, or do they add a weapon in the first round?
I think if Isaiah Simmons is there, they got to take him, man. That kid's so good. They need to get athletic on defense. They got a stout fronts. I should say they got a stout defensive line. I'll say that. But they need some help at linebacker. I'm not a big fan of Martinez. He's just not very athletic. And go back and watch him in the NFC Championship game. Kyle Shanahan ripped him to shreds.
Sure did.
His entire game plan in the NFC Championship game was just to put him in space, and his head was spinning. So getting a guy like Isaiah Simmons, I think, would really help him.
Do you feel the deal that Byron Jones got? Do you feel like he was worth to be the highest paid DB?
Yeah, I like Byron. I think he's a good player. Now, I think he gets kind of unfairly knocked just because he's a cornerback that really doesn't turn plays into interceptions. I believe he only has like 2 interceptions over the past 2 years, but interceptions are kind of like the cherry on the top for me. And if you're keeping your guy from catching the ball, I'm completely fine with that. That's why I say interceptions are kind of like just being in great situations, and they're kind of luck to me, especially if you get like a bad throw or something like that. It's kind of more of a cherry on the top as opposed to a requirement. But he's a guy that's known for locking the guy across from him up, so I'm completely fine with that.
What's your take on the Ravens D-line rebuild?
Oh, man, Eric DeCosta's building a monster up there, man. You got Calais Campbell. You got some other guys along the interior, and then you got that offense that's tough to stop. They gotta translate it into winning some playoff games, and we'll see if Lamar is able to replicate what he did last year. But I'm a big fan of what they're doing up there. That D-line is going to be disgustingly good, man.
For sure. Here's a question. How can a coach get started to transition to the NFL? We've seen home high school coaches get to the NFL. How does that process work?
Good question. It's kind of a luck of the draw, in my opinion.
High school coaches, sorry.
You have to know some really good people, and coaching is all about connections, man. And that's the big thing from getting from even high school to college. You have to know the right people, and you have to interact with the right people. And don't just talk to high school coaches when you go to these clinics. Go to some college coaches, pop up on them, and just ask if you can talk to them. Sit down in their film room and even set up a meeting with them. Sometimes I know when I was at Central, we used to go over to Carolina every year. And then when we didn't play Duke, we would go over there and just go and talk to them. So just have some interactions with these college coaches, just because you never know who's going to pop up. Excuse me. I'm out of school helping out right now, man. All right, so you never know who's going to pop up with the head coaching job. And if you're talking to a defensive backs coach, you never know when he's going to pop up with the head coaching job. So just talk to these head coach or talk to these position coaches or even these coordinators, just because it's all about connections. And that's how some of these SEC coaches end up with these NFL jobs, just because coaching is all about who you know and your connections. And you want to build up what I like to call your coaching tree. You want to always extend branches. You want to add to these branches, just because you want to stay in contact with them. You never know who's going to pop up and be the next Sean McVay or Cliff Kingsbury. You just never know. So you always want to keep in contact with these coaches, and just don't be scared to talk and reach out to some of these guys.
Good deal. What's been, in your opinion, out of all the coaching changes and whether at college or pro, what do you think has been the best coaching move so far?
Talking about college or NFL?
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, I don't think any really stand out a whole bunch this year to me. But last year, I was a fan of what the Cardinals did with Cliff Kingsbury. It was a bit risky. And I know there was a little bit of stigma going around with that just because he was the USC offensive coordinator for like 2 weeks, and then he wasn't very good at Texas Tech. But I knew the moment they hired Cliff Kingsbury that they were going to take Kyler Murray. So I was really excited about that. That's a good one. Mike Norvell at Florida State,
Yeah.
completely forgot about that. I'm actually a Florida State fan, so I was really excited about that. I'm mad I forgot about that. But, excuse me, Norvell, I love what he's doing. He did a heck of a job at Memphis, and he's one guy that really does a good job of recruiting players that understand his brand. And everywhere he's been, his message has carried over. And I think that's exactly what Florida State needs just because, I mean, the program's just in turmoil right now. They really didn't believe in Willie down there. They didn't believe in Taggart and his message. But I think Norvell, him coming in, establishing the program, I think he's already done a really good job. And I'm sure you guys don't really know these kids' names, but they had 2 kids that probably were going to be first-round picks if they came out this year. One of them is named Hamza Nasruddin. He's a safety who's really good. And then the other one, his name is Marvin Wilson, who's a defensive tackle. Both of those kids were probably going to be first-round picks if they would have came out this year. But Norvell was able to convince them and come back for their senior season. So that just goes to show you how much belief they have in him already.
That's a great point. That's a great point. You think the Rule Brady combination out in Carolina, how you think that'll work?
It's gonna be interesting, man. I got to be careful what I say about this, but I think there's kind of mixed signals with what's going on there right now. I thought they did Cam really wrong with the way they treated him. I don't like that they came out and they supported him and said that they were going to allow him to get healthy before making a decision, and now they're probably going to end up cutting him just because there's really going to be no takers for him. Just because I think they're backed themselves into a corner. Just because every team around the league knows they don't have to trade any compensation for him, just because they're eventually going to cut him. They're going to be able to get them for free, in a sense, without giving up any draft picks. But I think they're tanking without saying that they're tanking through the media, if that makes sense. And I think signing Bridgewater was a great example of that. I think they really should embrace the tank just because, I mean, there's not a lot of talent on that roster outside of Christian McCaffrey. I like some of the perimeter weapons that they have, DJ Moore, Curtis Samuel. I like what they have there. But outside of that, man, they don't have a lot of talent on that roster. But what I mean by mixed signals is that if you're going to be bad, just come out and say it. And I know you're still trying to sell tickets, but I wouldn't assign Bridgewater just because I think he's good enough to win you 5 or 6 games. But if you want to be bad, go out and sign a bad quarterback, or just let Will Grier or the other kid, I believe his name is Kyle Allen, just go ahead and let him steer the ship and win you 2 or 3 games and get the kid from Clemson or the kid coming out of Ohio State. So if that's what you want to do, just be clear with your message and be transparent about it.
Where do you think Cam will end up? And is that wherever you think he ends up, is that the best spot for him?
I was hoping he ended up in Chicago. I think the Chargers just came out and said they're going to go forward with Tyrod Taylor. So I was kind of surprised about that. I was hoping Cam would land there. But, I mean, it's a game of musical chairs right now. And they seem like him and Jameis seems like the two that's going to be left standing once the music cuts off, unfortunately. So I don't really know where Cam's going to go right now, but the options are definitely – it's slim pickings right now.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Did anybody else have any questions? He said one of them got to come to the Jags.
They like Minshew, man. Minshew mania down there. They like him a lot.
Yeah, they did. He was tearing it up for a little bit. Coach wants to know who's your favorite quarterback in the draft.
I like Burrow. You can hear me? My bad.
Yeah, you good.
I said I like the kid from of course Burrow. Everybody loves him around the league. Tua, the injury thing or with him. That's something that's going around right now. Durability. That's a big question mark for him right now. But the kid I really like a lot is the kid from Utah State, Jordan Love. I like him a lot. And I think the common misconception out there about him is that he dwindled a lot last year. And what I mean by that is he only threw 20 touchdowns and 17 interceptions, I believe it was. But the year before, he had 32 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. But what a lot of people don't know about him is that he lost his head coach, he lost his offensive coordinator, and he also lost his top 3 weapons. Dax Raymond was a tight end. Also, Darwin Thompson was a running back who they really essentially ran their entire offense through that kid. So with him, I mean, he was playing hero ball, what I like to call it, and he just had to. It was a miracle that they made a bowl game last year, man. Honestly, and he lost so much, and I think if he's probably not going to be ready year one. He's going to have to be an understudy somewhere. I was hoping that the Colts would take him, but they ended up trading their first round pick. So we'll see what does happen. Maybe he ends up in Tampa with BA. I think that would be a really good situation for him to learn under Brady for a year or two. But I think he's going to end up going top 15. But I'm a big fan of that kid.
Favorite running back?
Ooh, I got a lot, man. I like Swift from Georgia. I think he's going to be really good. Dobbins from Ohio State is really good. There's a kid from Maryland I like a lot, Anthony McFarland. I think he's going to be really good that you can probably get in the third or fourth round. I mean, not being biased or anything, but I think Cam Akers is going to be – I think he's going to be a much better pro than what he was in college just because the offensive line that he was playing behind, man, it was pretty bad the way he was able – what he had to deal with every week and then the output that he was able to have every week as well. I think it was a miracle that he was able to get as many yards as he was able to get. So I think Cam Akers, I think he's going to be a really good pro. The Falcons like him a lot. Just talking to him at the Combine, he said they've met with him a couple times. And then they just released Devontae Freeman. So maybe they go from one Florida State running back to another.
There you go. So obviously, you see the graphic all the times, especially when they, do the first round picks about how many were multi-sport athletes. So what's your take on that? Like, obviously, you get some sports specialization nowadays, and obviously that's kind of a topic that gets discussed here and there. But how important is that to you with, athletes playing multiple sports? Like, how important is that to you?
It is, and I think it's kind of different just because when we were growing up, sports weren't so expensive, and we played outside a little bit more than what these kids do now, but everything's about money now in a sense. And I don't want to say it was the same for us growing up, but it wasn't as much. Everything wasn't so severe as far as a price wise, but now it's so hard for kids to play double sports just because it costs so much in an organized setting I'm talking about. So I think with prospects now playing multiple sports, I think I value that very highly. And I think a great example of that is the kid from Iowa, offensive tackle Tristan Wirfs. I mean, he was a state champion discus thrower, a state champion shot putter, state champion wrestler. So he's a winner everywhere he's been. And I like that about him. Kids that play multi-sports, it doesn't just teach you a lesson within that battle, but it teaches you cohesion within a unit as well. And that's something that I like. And sports, there's so many messages that it teaches you within that you can't just teach as a parent. So that's something that I like about these kids that play multiple sports.
Awesome. And we'll end on this question here, Coach. Coach Lorena wants to know, how do you go about scouting 1AA guys?
What do you mean by how do I go about scouting? Like, how do I separate them from competition, or what exactly does it mean? Go a little bit more in depth.
Let's see what he says. Well, while he's typing that, do you have a favorite 1AA guy right now that you like?
Yeah, so his name is Jeremy Chin. He's a safety from Southern Illinois. He was fantastic at the Senior Bowl. I think he ran in the low 4.4s. He's about 6'3", about 220 pounds. A kid that's very fluid. Love him. Ball production is great. He's had 3 interceptions every single year of his career, so he has that cherry on top, like I like to say. What I love about Jeremy, though, is that with these defensive backs, and Coach Fry, you can attest to this, you have to be able to play every position on the back end now. It's not just, you just play free safety, or you play strong safety, or you play nickel, or you play outside corner. Something that you have to be able to do, and why I think the Honey Badger is so good is that you can play a multitude of positions, and it allows that versatility on the back end. That's what I like about Jeremy so much. So being able to play a multitude of positions, he's a guy I like to say, you have to pause the screen and see where he is prior to the snap, just because one snap he'll be on the roof, he'll be playing free safety. Next play he'll be blitzing off the edge as a nickel guy, and then the next play he'll be playing outside at corner. So just having that type of versatility, that's what I love about him. And the more hats you can wear, the better for you, especially being a 1AA player. If you don't play special teams, you're probably not going to get drafted, just because you're already coming from a lower level, and then you're fighting an uphill battle just to make the roster. So the more hats you can wear, the better. And these kids that don't play special teams, I highly advise them to do it, just because the more hats you can wear, the better. And that's how you can find your ticket into the league, especially staying on the roster as a small school guy, working your way up from special teams, and then having a key role, whether that's on offense or defense.
For sure. That's awesome. I have to keep an eye out for that dude. Jordan, how can these dudes connect with you? on social media?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at JReidNFL. That's at JREID NFL. I'm usually on there for most of the parts of the day, just tweeting out different thoughts that I have about some of the transactions going on around the league. I post all 22 clips, strengths and weaknesses of some of the kids that I'm watching as well. That's something that I've found a really good niche for doing, and the audience really likes as well. So just posting those all 22 clips and cutting out some clips that I like of some of these kids. You can find my work on the draftnetwork.com. We have plenty of stuff that's going up daily on some of that stuff. And then I'll make sure to get all you guys a copy of my draft guide as well. It's going to come out April 13th. So be on the lookout for that. And I'll just send that to you, and then you can just send it out to everybody.
Yeah.
I'll make sure to get you guys a copy of that.
Awesome. That'd be great, man. We appreciate that. I've seen it, man. It's in depth, man, especially, if you're big into, obviously, following the pro game and the draft itself and following these prospects, man. It's exactly what you need. Totally in depth, man. Great information, ton of insight, man. It's awesome. So make sure you do that. Make sure you follow Jordan on Twitter. If anybody wants to drop their Twitter in the chat, man, feel free. Obviously, we've been talking about it all week. Just, we want to stay connected and stay following with each other. But we appreciate you getting on here, man. Ton of great insight, awesome information, and yeah, absolutely keep doing your thing, man. It was awesome.
No problem. I appreciate it, man. Thank you guys for having me.
Absolutely. All right, y'all. Catch y'all later. Next session's at 4. See y'all then.